HOA sent security to my door, not knowing I'm the commander's wife. The knock was so loud, it rattled my windows. I opened the door, and there they stood, two men in black uniforms, staring at me like I was a criminal. Their eyes were cold, their tone was colder. "Ma'am, you're in violation." But what they didn't know, what they could never imagine, was that they were about to pick a fight with the commander's wife, and that mistake would change everything. Welcome to HOA Stories, where every street hides secrets, and every neighbor has a dark smile. My name is Daniel. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood on the edge of town. I work in logistics at the county base, and my wife, she's the one who carries real power here. To most people, we look like any other family on the block. Perfect yard, perfect mailbox, perfect house, but beneath the fresh paint and trimmed lawns, our HOA rules the street like a private kingdom, and last summer, they came knocking on my door, not knowing who I really was. The night was quiet, too quiet for my street. No cars passing, no kids riding bikes, just the sound of sprinklers clicking in the distance. I remember standing in my living room, staring at the clock. It was almost midnight. And then it happened, a knock so hard, it shook the glass on my windows. Not one knock, but three. Boom, boom, boom. I froze for a second. It was too late for visitors, too loud for a neighbor in trouble. It felt different, like someone wanted me to be scared. I opened the door slowly, and there they were. Two men in black uniforms, shiny boots, heavy belts, radios crackling. They stood straight, shoulders squared, looking at me as if I was some kind of criminal. Their eyes were cold, no smile, no respect, just blank stares filled with power. "Ma'am, you're in violation." That was the first thing they said. No greeting, no explanation, just those sharp words. I looked at them confused. Violation? For what? I pay my dues. I keep my grass trimmed. I never break the silly rules. But their faces didn't move. They just stood there, like statues waiting for me to collapse under their pressure. One of them pointed, not at me, not at my house, but at the driveway, and my heart almost laughed out loud. He was pointing at my husband's vehicle, big, black, armored, a machine that belonged to the military base, the kind of vehicle that made people stop and stare when it drove down the street. "That is not allowed in this community," he said, his voice sharp, like a knife cutting through the night. I wanted to smile, I wanted to laugh in his face, but instead, I stayed quiet, because I knew something he didn't know. That vehicle wasn't just any car. It wasn't just some toy parked in the wrong place. It belonged to the commander of this county, and I was his wife. But I didn't say it yet. I wanted to see how far they would go. I wanted to hear every threat, every word of arrogance spilling from their mouths, so I leaned on the doorframe and asked softly, "Is that so?" They pulled out a paper, a violation notice, neat print, bold letters, $500 fine, immediate removal or legal action. The man shoved it toward me like a weapon, waiting for me to take it, to bow my head and accept their power. But I didn't move. I just stared. My silence made them nervous. Their voices got louder. Their hands got tighter on the paper. In that moment, I saw it clear. They didn't come here for justice. They came here for control, for intimidation, for a taste of power in a world where they had none. And they thought I was weak, just another suburban housewife they could push around. But they were wrong. I took the paper slowly, looked at it, read it out loud word by word, and then I smiled, because I knew tomorrow, when they realized who I really was, their world would turn upside down. The sprinklers kept clicking in the distance. A dog barked 3 houses away. The night was calm again, but in my heart, I felt the storm begin. The HOA had drawn the first line, and they had no idea the battle they just started. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know my husband's title. They didn't know the power sitting quietly behind my front door. But soon, very soon, they would. "Now tell me, If the HOA knocked on your door at midnight, accusing you of a violation you didn't commit, how would you react? The morning after the knock, the street looked calm again. Birds were singing, neighbors were watering lawns, children rode bikes like nothing had happened, but I knew better. This place was not calm. It never was. It only looked perfect on the outside. That's the truth about my neighborhood. Behind the trimmed hedges and smiling faces lived rules written by the HOA, rules that strangled us every single day. Mailboxes must be exactly 5 feet tall. Grass must never grow higher than 2 inches. Trash cans must be hidden by sunrise, or fines will come, and people obeyed. Not because they wanted to, but because they were scared of the board, the letters, the threats. The endless notices slipped into mail slots like poison. It was power, pure power, dressed up as community standards. I thought back to the men who stood at my door, their black boots on my welcome mat, their voices cold, their eyes sharp, like they were soldiers of the HOA president herself. And in a way, they were, because our president was no ordinary neighbor. She was the queen of this cul-de-sac. Her word was law. Her smile was a mask, and her punishments were legendary. I had seen it before. The neighbor who planted flowers without permission, fined until he ripped them out. The retired man who painted his shed the wrong shade of beige, taken to court for damaging property value. Even the single mom down the street who left her bike leaning against the garage overnight, slapped with 3 letters in 1 week. This was the world I lived in, a world where pettiness was power, where control tasted sweet to the ones sitting on the board. But now, they had made their biggest mistake. They had come for me. I stood in my kitchen, holding the violation notice they gave me. The paper felt heavy in my hand, $500 for parking an armored vehicle in my driveway. I wanted to laugh, but instead I felt something else. Anger, cold and sharp. Because this was not just about a car. This was about respect. This was about someone thinking they could scare me, silence me, rule over me, and that I could never allow. I looked out my window at the street that pretended to be perfect. The neighbors waved politely, but I could see it in their eyes. Fear, submission, silence. And I made a promise to myself that silence would end. The HOA had woken the wrong house, and they had no idea the war they just started. So tell me, if your HOA controlled every blade of grass, every mailbox, every little thing about your life, would you obey quietly, or would you fight back? The paper sat on my kitchen counter, staring at me like a threat I couldn't ignore. Every time I looked at it, the bold black letters screamed at me: violation notice, immediate removal, legal action. It was just paper, but it felt heavier than steel. By afternoon, I heard voices outside, low, hushed, sharp. I peeked through the blinds and saw them, 2 of the same guards who came last night, standing on my driveway, talking, pointing, smirking, like my home was already theirs. I stepped outside. Sunlight hit their black uniforms. Their boots dug into my driveway as if they owned the concrete. One of them pulled out his notepad and scribbled something down. The other raised his phone and started snapping pictures. That was it. I walked straight up to them. "Can I help you?" I asked, calm but cold. The taller one looked at me with that same arrogant stare. "Documenting evidence, ma'am. This vehicle is in violation of community rules." He said it like a script. Practiced. Rehearsed. Like he had done this 100 times before. Crush. Control. Move on. I folded my arms. "And what authority gives you the right to step on my property?" His smirk widened. "The HOA board has authorized us to enforce compliance." Enforce compliance. Those words tasted like poison. These weren't guards. These were attack dogs, sent by the president herself to scare me into obedience, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I leaned closer and whispered, Do you even know whose vehicle this is? For the first time, I saw hesitation in his eyes. His pen stopped scratching the notepad. His partner shifted uncomfortably. They weren't used to pushback. They weren't used to someone standing tall instead of shrinking away. I let the silence hang in the air, heavy and sharp. And then I smiled, because I knew the truth they didn't. That vehicle belonged to my husband, the commander, and the men in front of me were standing on the driveway of the commander's wife. I didn't say it yet, not fully, because sometimes silence is the most dangerous weapon. Sometimes letting your enemy walk deeper into their mistake makes the victory even sweeter. So I let them finish their scribbles. I let them take their little photos, and then I said softly, "Be very careful who you're dealing with." They shifted again. Their fake confidence cracked just a little, and in that moment, I knew this was only the beginning. The board had declared war, and they had no idea the storm that was waiting for them. Now tell me, if strangers stood on your driveway taking pictures of your home for the HOA, would you stay silent, or would you confront them face to face? By evening, the letterbox clanged. I walked outside and pulled out a thick white envelope, my name printed in bold. The HOA seal stamped at the corner like it was some kind of government order. I already knew what it was, but I opened it anyway. Pages and pages of threats, legal terms, penalty warnings, talk of removal of property, breach of contract, further action. It wasn't just a fine anymore. It was war in black and white ink. I sat at my kitchen table reading it over and over, not because I didn't understand it, but because I couldn't believe how far they were willing to go. All this, over a vehicle in my driveway. By nightfall, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring once, twice, and then I answered. A cold voice spoke. "This is the HOA board. If the violation is not corrected within 48 hours, legal counsel will be involved." No greeting, no discussion, just a threat dropped like a hammer on my chest. I didn't answer. I just let the silence speak for me, because silence makes people nervous, and the more nervous they are, the more mistakes they make. I hung up slowly, my hands steady, my heart steady, because inside, I felt something grow. Not fear, not panic, but a quiet rage, the kind of rage that waits, the kind that sharpens instead of burns. The next morning, 2 new notices were taped to my door, one for failure to respond, another for non-compliance. Neighbors began to notice. They stared from across the street, whispered at their mailboxes. Some looked away when I caught their eyes. Others gave me that sad, pitying look, the look people give when they think you've already lost, but they didn't know me. They didn't know my husband. They didn't know the fire that was building inside this house, because the board thought they could crush me with letters and phone calls. They thought they could drown me in paper threats, but the more they tried to push me down, the stronger I stood. I wasn't just protecting a car. I was protecting my dignity, my home, my family's name, and soon, very soon, they would see who they were really dealing with. Now let me ask you, if the HOA buried you in threats, fines, and legal letters just to scare you, would you pay up quietly? Or would you fight until the very end? The sun was just coming up when I heard footsteps on my driveway again. I didn't even need to look this time. I already knew who it was. The guards. Their black boots on my concrete. Their heavy voices echoing like they owned the street. But this time, I was ready. I stepped outside before they could knock. The morning air was cold, sharp, carrying the sound of sprinklers and birds. But in that silence, it was only us. They froze when they saw me. One of them cleared his throat and spoke. "Ma'am, this is your final notice. Non-compliance will lead to forced action." His words were hard, but his eyes were softer. I could see it, the crack in his confidence, the tiny shadow of doubt crawling into his mind. And that's when I leaned closer, my voice calm, almost a whisper. "Do you know whose vehicle this is?" He blinked. His partner shifted. They didn't answer, so I smiled, slow, deliberate, and then I said it. It belongs to the commander of this county, my husband. The silence that followed was almost sweet. Their faces drained, their fake strength melted away. The clipboard trembled in one man's hand. I didn't have to shout. I didn't have to argue. The truth itself was heavy enough to break them. You've been standing on the commander's driveway, threatening the commander's wife, I continued, and every word you just spoke, every picture you took, will be remembered. They looked at each other, uneasy, nervous. Suddenly, their boots didn't seem so tall anymore. Suddenly, their voices didn't sound so strong. One of them stuttered, "We'll report back to the board." And just like that, they turned and walked away, for the first time. I felt the balance shift. The HOA wanted to scare me, but instead, I had shaken them to their core. The game wasn't over, but the rules had just changed, and as I watched them retreat down my street, one thought burned in my mind. What would the board do now, knowing they had picked a fight with the wrong woman? Now tell me, if you had the chance to drop one truth that could flip the entire power game against the HOA, would you keep it secret? Or would you use it right in their faces? The next morning, I saw her, the queen herself, the HOA president, walking up my driveway with her perfect hair, her perfect smile, but her eyes were sharp as knives. She didn't knock. She didn't wait. She stood there like she owned the place. "Good morning," she said sweetly, but I knew better. Her sweetness was sugar covering poison. She held a folder in her hands, thick, heavy, stuffed with papers. She tapped it lightly like a weapon she was proud to carry. "I think we've had a misunderstanding," she said, her voice smooth, rehearsed, dripping with control. I stayed quiet. I wanted her to speak first, because silence makes the powerful nervous. Finally, she opened the folder. She pulled out pictures of my driveway, my husband's vehicle, my front yard, each one stamped with bold red letters, "Violation." "You see," she continued, "our community has rules. Rules that protect property value. Rules that keep order." I could hear the threat in every word. She wasn't just protecting property value. She was protecting her throne. I leaned against the doorframe and studied her. The way her fingers gripped the folder a little too tight. The way her smile wavered when I didn't respond. The way her eyes darted quickly at the armored vehicle parked behind me. She hated it, not because of the car itself, but because it was a symbol she couldn't control. Finally, I spoke. "Do you know who that vehicle belongs to?" Her smile faltered just for a second, but it was enough. "Yes," she said carefully. "We've been informed." That was it. Her tone shifted. Her confidence cracked. The queen of the HOA. Suddenly cautious in front of me, she closed the folder slowly. Her words softened into something almost desperate. "We'd like to resolve this peacefully." Peacefully? After threats, after guards, after letters shoved into my mailbox, I almost laughed. But instead, I leaned forward and whispered, "Your rules don't scare me." Her eyes froze. Her smile disappeared. And for the first time, the president of our HOA looked small. She turned quickly, mumbled something about reviewing the situation, and walked down my driveway with her fake grace. But her shoulders were stiff, her pace too fast, her mask broken. I stood there watching her retreat, knowing the war wasn't just between me and the board anymore. It was personal now, and the president knew she couldn't win. Now tell me, if the HOA president came to your door smiling fake smiles, trying to scare you with papers and power, would you bow your head, or would you stare her down until her mask finally cracked? Days passed, but no more guards came. The mailbox stayed empty, the phone stayed silent, and the heavy envelopes that once landed at my door never showed up again. It was as if the board had vanished overnight. Neighbors noticed. They whispered even more now. Some smiled at me secretly, others kept their distance. But one thing was clear. The HOA was quiet, too quiet. Then one afternoon, I saw her again, the president, walking down the street with her clipboard, waving her perfect smile at the neighbors. But when her eyes met mine, she looked away, quickly, almost afraid. That was the moment I knew the game was over. The letters, the threats, the midnight knocks, all gone, because they had learned the truth. And the truth was heavier than all their rules combined. The commander's wife was not to be too. Ouched. Life on the street returned to normal, lawnmowers humming, kids riding bikes, mailboxes standing at the perfect height, but nothing felt the same. Not to me, not to them, because every time I stepped outside to water my flowers or waved to a passing neighbor, I felt their eyes, watching me quietly, remembering the day the HOA tried to break me and failed. The president still sends newsletters, still signs her name at the bottom with pride, still pretends to be the queen of the cul-de-sac. But I see through her, and she knows I do. The funny thing is, they thought they could control me with paper and fear, but in the end, they're the ones who walk past my house with lowered eyes. The HOA wanted power. Instead, they gave it to me. And sometimes at night, I wonder, what will they try next time? Because in neighborhoods like mine, peace is only ever temporary. Now tell me, if you defeated your HOA and left them too scared to ever knock again, would you enjoy the silence? Or would you wait for their next mistake so you could crush them all over again?